New Level Cap podcast is a show about fun, friends, game design, and all things otherwise. Your hosts are Marco DeSantos and Brad Telton of Level 99 Games. I'm Chris Solis, your producer, and without further ado, please enjoy the show.
Well, hello, everyone. You have to listen to me. It's the New Level Cap podcast, and I'm here in the wilds of West Virginia, trying not to get killed as Brad is away. And I am about to introduce myself because I'm your host, Marco DeSantos, also known as the Mechanic Critic, and with me is a very special survival guest here to give you all the hotness. Please, everyone, give a warm round of applause to our very special guest.
This is Daniel Honig, Andrel, the balance lead for Level 99 Games, and one of the head playtesters. It's nice to be here, so tossing it back to Marco.
Are you sure it's nice to be here? Are you actually happy to be here? Because I'm pretty sure that to most people, spending around half an hour to 45 minutes with me sounds like torture.
I mean, you're the survival guy, right? That's how that works?
Yeah, that's true. All right, now, Daniel, what you have to do is eat this bug.
I mean, what bug is it?
For survival.
I hear grasshoppers are in style nowadays.
I mean, no, it's like one of those, like, juicy ones, like when you bite into it.
Oh,
that's
a shame.
Like Bear Grylls.
My dad keeps hyping up chocolate-covered grasshoppers, so...
Are they actually good? That sounds really interesting.
I haven't had them yet, but I've been told they were good, like, twice.
Okay, here's the real question. Has your dad recommended things before, and have you found them good?
Not weird things. Also, he eats a steak medium well, so, you know.
Wait, is that wrong?
It varies. We're the medium rare type, apparently.
I see. I'm a medium well guy myself. Meat lovers, don't at me. All right, Daniel. You have a very special set of skills, right? Which involve making fun of me and being good at balancing stuff. But let's step back a little bit, Daniel. Maybe not everybody knows who you are. They know you're the lead balance guy, but really, the real question is, who is Daniel Honig? Are you a debonair scientist? Are you a secret spy? What are you?
So, in BattleCON world, I used to be a tournament player for a while. I was in Gen Con a couple years, mostly playing against Charles and some other crew, and I realized that I pretty much just looked at the tournament list, and I was like, hey, I remember this game. And ended up playing, this would have been right when War Remastered came out. Did well. I came in second to Charles 3 years in a row, because we all have to duel Charles for a while in the tournament. And then actually started doing most of my playtesting for Level 99 when Exceed was being done, because I was pretty active back when we had playtest forums, which are pretty much dead now, but actually might actually be dead now. But
we migrated to Discord a while back.
Yeah. But basically, back when Trials was being tested, there were a bunch of people who were trying to organize everything, and so I was one of the ones who was pretty active and collecting a lot of notes, and so had a decent impact on Trials. But really the first game that I did a ton of work on for Level 99 was actually Exceed. So Brad, I think, was streaming some chat about Exceed, and I basically messaged him afterwards and said, hey, here's a bunch of bounce ideas. And so we went back and forth over the course of a month or two. And then after that, I started doing the same thing for BattleCON and ended up joining on staff really heavily for BattleCON Online, which is kind of my playground. It's where I make most of the changes and work with the community there.
So overall, you are not only a BattleCON tournament player, you're also the lead Exceed balancer and lead BattleCON balancer, all because you're some nerd who liked video games and or playing board games about people hitting each other. Is that correct?
That is definitely true. So I'm an engineer for my non-Level 99 day job, and a lot of it is like sort of system interaction, a lot of digital work. A lot of that sort of design ideas were basically, I wanted to make stuff, right? Or to see how to clean stuff up and try and make things more interesting. And a lot of that was basically playing Exceed, and so I started playing Exceed right when it came out at Gen Con. I think I went in for like the lowest pledge tier on the Kickstarter and then bought all the boxes at Gen Con. And I sort of found the game system really interesting. And I think I still prefer the BattleCon like overall system of setting your attack pairs and lining all that up. But Exceed has a lot of really interesting moving parts. And so that was sort of the one that I first sat down and started doing a lot of balance work on. And then after that, because BattleCon was really the one that I had played more, I got involved in that. And then BCO is kind of the freest reign that I have. You know, print stuff you can update, and it's a big update cycle, but BCO is an online game. I can make consistent patches. There's a larger community that I have a lot of people to chat with and sort of figure out what direction to take things in and what might be interesting here or there.
Yeah, that sounds great. Okay, but for this episode, let's talk about your BattleCon love, because I'm pretty sure everybody's really excited to hear everything coming out of your mouth, because BattleCon Unleashed is essentially like the last giant balance update that we're ever going to do for BattleCon, and it's going to be your fault. Whether that fault is good or not, that's up to you, I guess. So Daniel, what's the... Oh no. Why? Are you scared?
So a lot of that is basically... BattleCon Unleashed is, balance patches for everybody except the Wanderers, because the Wanderers are new, and Dev, because Dev Remastered is going to be new. And really the biggest sort of question for BattleCon is there's a lot of characters, right? You have a range from the Arec and Kaitlyn style of characters that really mess with the opponent to the Carolyns and the Hikarus, right? Just the punch people who get lots of stats, sort of walk slowly at you and hit you as hard as they can until something works out. The goal of balance is ideally make everybody viable. That's sort of the ground level goal. At least almost everybody. I'm sure some characters are going to have, issues here and there. It's easier if you have a character that's a little bit weak, but still either fun or still good, because a good enough player can do some crazy things. I mean, Charles mained Voko for a long time. I think did okay with him, even pre-changes, because Voko was a little silly, but Charles is really good.
I think that's a big thing I wanna talk to you about, actually, is that, so the goal of playtesting is to make everybody viable, but viable in what way? A lot of people, when they hear the word viable, especially a lot of our competitive players, they think, if this character is not S top tier, they're completely useless. So is everybody supposed to be S top tier? Is that the kind of game we're pushing for?
So I think there's sort of two schools of balance design, and you'll hear this a lot. There's the characters sort of have a similar structure school, where everything looks a little bit similar, and generally the variances, you'll have a lot of characters that have a gap closer, a way to run at the opponent, a range tool, a defensive tool, a fast tool, or at least something in that vein, right? They have a game plan, they have a backup plan, they have a backup to the backup. And then you have every character is super oppressive in one specific way school of balance, where you're really trying to maximize your character's gimmick, trying to find like a laser focus on what is your character good at, and making them really, really good at that, with the assumption that will carry them up to S or A tier for as long as you need. So, you have a character like Ryuk, and he's the ranger. He has a bunch of bullets, he shoots things well. You give him the premise that, hey, this character will always win at range. And it might work, but what makes things tricky in that school is that the gimmicks don't always interact cleanly, right? There's 90-ish characters at this point if you don't count promos. It's I think about 100 if you do. Yep. And every so often you'll run into characters that just their gimmick is they run at you a lot.
And
that's why
their gimmick cancels your gimmick, essentially.
Yeah, and sometimes it works out because there's a mix-up where your gimmick is still good half the time, and then theirs is really good half the time, and it's kind of a wash. And sort of the war meme was always that whenever you were asking about matchups, it would always come up with Ryuk versus Hekech, because Ryuk's thing is he's really good at range, and Hekech's thing is if he starts to beat far away from you, he can teleport next to you and get really fast. And Ryuk kind of stands there and goes, huh? But in reality, it's kind of somewhere in the middle between those two schools, because Ryuk does have close-range tools. I mean, he has point blank. If Force Special Action helped also, he can Force Strike with a useful bullet, power, or speed, or something. But a lot of it comes down to the fact that characters are going to have a game plan, and how much they rely on that game plan might vary, but as long as they can still do stuff, then they're probably not going to be, D or F tier, as long as their game is rounded. So the sort of goal of balance is that whenever you play a character, you can go into pretty much any matchup with the idea that this is at least competitive, right? You might not be favored, you might be disfavored, you might even be badly disfavored, but as long as you have a decent chance, as long as you can come there and say, hey, my player skill is gonna make a dent, and I feel like I can win, then I'm doing my job, the other playtesters are doing their job. And it goes the other way too. If your character always feels like they can win, and the opponent sometimes does, and sometimes it's hey, this matchup is garbage, then one of the characters, or both maybe, has an issue. And so a lot of our goals were sort of to sand down those rough edges and to look at it from a design standpoint, because balance can be numbers tuning. Sometimes it's as simple as this has +2 power, it should be 1.
It's when you have to change effects.
Yeah, a lot of the time you have to change effects, and sometimes that works, and sometimes that's where we lean on our playtesters. What happens is I might have ideas, or a lot of the time I'll send it to Brad and be like, Brad, this isn't working. What are some things that might work? And then I'll get maybe 3 or 4 shapes for a thing, and that's really what I care about. Because what makes things interesting, especially in Exceed, but in BattleCon also, are shapes. Is this a slow counterattacky thing? Is this a fast pushy thing? Is this
a hard read style kind of thing? Is this the movement style kind of thing? Is this the one that has control effects kind of thing? Attacks have shapes, right?
And that's really a lot of what makes the design on these games interesting, because if you look at a character like Darius, right? Darius is a little bit weird because he has drawbacks that are sometimes really effective and sometimes not, but his shapes are kind of what's interesting. He has a move the opponent thing, he has a lot of movement thing, he has a auto dodge kind of situationally thing, he has slow counterattack thing. And the sort of balance work that we've done in his case is he's doing too much damage when he goes for full power. What's the culprit? It's slow counterattacky thing, right? That's his biggest power burst. So the sort of consensus was staggering should go down 1 power, and then that's probably fine. That's kind of the surface level, just changing numbers. But a lot of the time, looking at where the shapes are is what really gets you that.
I think what I want to say to end this discussion is this. It seems that the main goal of any BattleCon balancing isn't to make everyone top-tier tournament viable, but it's more to just make everybody feel like they have a fighting chance, right? So if a matchup ends up being 40-60, or maybe sometimes 30-70, that's okay. That's gonna happen, right? Because the thing about BattleCon that everybody, I think, has to understand is that we're trying to balance literally 90 times 89 matchups, right?
Yeah, that's where the problems come in, especially because in BattleCon, the real sort of goal of the design is for characters to have very strong, gimmick identities. They should do something.
Yeah.
It should feel interesting. And a lot of the time, it's just kind of weird how that plays out. So, Seraphina's bonus wipe versus a bonus heavy character is gonna feel bad. But at the same time, that doesn't even necessarily mean the matchup is too bad, because there's other things going on.
Yeah, for sure.
Seraphina versus Magdalena comes up, but Magdalena has good stats. She has, she's getting a lot of stun guard, which Seraphina has trouble dealing with. There's sort of other answers that she has.
And you can just dodge Silver, right?
Yeah, you can just, it feels weird because Silver, Magdalena late game feels like she should be unstoppable. But when Silver, whatever, runs into Spiritual Shot and you wipe the +4 but still trade down because Spiritual's +2 or +1 and Silver's -1, it's still, the matchup still works. So a lot of the goal is, finding those rough edge cases and making things at least play reasonably well.
Yeah, I think that's something also that we have to point out is that simply because your character's main gimmick stops working doesn't mean the matchup's bad. That's a thing most people misconstrue, because they're like, oh, I'm Rukyuk and I want to be ranged all the time, but this person keeps going melee against me. It's a bad matchup. Yeah, it's not. You just have to play differently.
I think
that's something.
It might be a bad matchup, but it also might be a matchup where, as Rukyuk, you want to stay at range 2 a lot and fish for crossfire with long shot, for example.
Yeah, no, but that's exactly what I mean, right? Like people think matchups are way worse than they actually are simply because their gimmick stops working.
Yeah, that definitely happens a lot. And some characters, there's, kind of a joke in the BCO Discord where Rukyuk is incredibly overpowered if you can play him perfectly, but he's impossible to play perfectly because there's just so many moving parts. And that's sort of true. Like, when you have that many things going on, and when you have the bullets, which are really powerful, and you have really crazy style ranges that have huge effects, your character is going to be naturally kind of unstable. So you might have a giant hole at range 1. That exists. But as long as the opponent is never always at range 1, which even Hakesh is not always at range 1. If he's doing that, he's going to lose power because he doesn't have access to his consistent spend the Dark Force for +3 power abilities.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure the only character who can consistently be range 1 against Rukyuk is somebody like either Dimitras, who's not in BCO, or Alexian. And even then, Alexian doesn't get to stay in melee for super long.
They can be range 1 for a while, but not even always.
That's the thing, right?
There's basically no character, at least not now that we nerfed K, that has unlimited end of beat or has that level of repositioning. The closest might be Klinhide. He has a lot of range 1 and after advancing.
Well, if we're being completely honest, the closest is obviously just a really good Tannis, right?
Sure, and that's actually a reason that Tannis tends to be really funky. So, Tannis is good. I mean...
Tannis is really good. I'm bad at her, but she's really good.
She's another one of those characters that comes up as, hey, if we nerf the top tier, she's probably top tier, and she's probably less fun to play against than the current top tier. So... Yeah. We always have, some concerns there, but BattleCon as a game sort of skews a bit towards control characters because taking less risks is good, right?
Yeah.
Having good positioning and good positioning control is good. Having stats doesn't mean much if you can't hit with them. And as designers, we don't want to make people feel bad for playing their character. So what that means is we don't want to have characters that will only hit for 2 all the time. The fantasy of playing character is maybe you're controlling a lot, but at least, get your punches in. So even if a character like Arec would be strictly balanced at 2 power across the board, that's not fun. So there are certain concessions that we have to make. Either we weaken the control, or we accept that he's just kind of good or
strong,
kind of bad. To the point of, we'll be pulling levers that at least don't sacrifice power.
Before you go into that,
what's up?
Let's take a short break so that we can talk about the actual changes we've made to some of the things people might be wondering about. Are you okay with that, Daniel?
Yep.
So let's take a break, Daniel. Dab. Did you dab?
Maybe.
All right, break time.
Want a game with other Level 99 Games fans, such as yourself? Join the official Discord channel. You can find the invitation link in the description below.
And we're back, everyone. I know we gave you a little spiciness on the Arec scale, so let's keep talking about it. So what did we do to Arec? My boy.
So for Arec, the main changes that Arec got were sort of going into what I said earlier. Arec was hitting too hard. That was always his biggest problem, was that, he's the control character. He's the best control character in the game. I don't think anybody would deny that. But he was also hitting really hard. he had +1s on 2 styles, one of which was sort of a +3. He had, he has a couple zeros, but the zeros can either auto-stun the opponent or start of beat make them miss, effectively.
Yeah.
So, for Arec, the goal was to drop those powers basically to zeros across the board, and weaken some of his more abusive mix-up, especially. So what that meant is we nerfed the power on Perceptional, we nerfed the power and speed on Mirrored, but upped the speed on Manipulative in exchange for power, so that his speeds kind of work out similarly. And the bigger change also was returning, which was kind of weirdly athematic originally, now lets him reuse the base if he matches it. So if he does returning strike and you do whatever strike, he'll still get the full board range because that was pretty cool. But he'll also get recycle, return that strike to your hand. So returning now actually returns instead of auto-stunning the opponent.
Okay, to be fair, I think old returning was still thematic, but like...
Was it? How was the auto-stun a return?
No. So the auto stun is a quote unquote return because what Arec does is he deflects your attack back at you.
Okay, so it's like a barrier?
Yeah, it's kind of like a barrier. So what happens is like he does illusions or stuff to make you hit yourself instead.
Okay, I pictured it as like some kind of weird boomerang magic.
It kind of works that way because it's like the opponent like shoots at Arec and then Arec like deflects it back at you. That's why it stuns you, right? Because you weren't expecting it.
Okay.
And that's why Arec auto stuns you and gets a like 4-0 trade is because Arec literally deflects your own attack back at you. So that's how I thought it was thematic. But this new returning is also pretty thematic as well, because you get to reuse bases, and as a control character, being able to reuse bases is pretty spicy good. So...
It's pretty good. We also are not changing Hex because Hex is silly, but with his powers dropped, it pretty much works out fine.
Yeah, I mean, Hex hitting for only 3 or 2 sounds really good. Instead of hitting for 4 at full board range, oh gosh.
So basically, Arec is the example that I mentioned earlier. You can nerf their effects, but you sort of don't want to go below a certain power threshold, because at that point, they just don't feel fun. So we basically brought Arec as far down as we could to sort of get to that threshold, and then shave down effects. So Perceptional now lets you teleport immediately behind the opponent, because that's the DBZ way. And...
Nothing personal, kid.
And returning no longer auto-stuns, so Marmalade doesn't occasionally randomly cry. But generally, he still is a really good control character, and in our testing, he feels quite balanced at this point. So...
That sounds great.
For all things said and done, if you played him before, you probably did pretty well with him a lot, but a lot of the strategies that you were going with should still work reasonably well. He isn't as oppressive in the sense of, no matter what I do, I'm going to win the beat. Because that's really the thing that was breaking him earlier.
Yeah. The thing that was ultimately breaking Arec was more of the fact that with a certain he was doing like the Mega Seth, where he was doing a certain combination of style-base token anti that was literally unbeatable. That became the problem.
Right, his filtering was amazing.
His filtering is just disgustingly good. And like the moment somebody's shot goes down, they're like destroyed. Like if you're a character with no range, like say Hikaru has to fight against Arec, the moment Hikaru drops shot, Arec just laughs at him and goes, "Good luck, I guess."
Another thing that comes up that's, I guess, wasn't immediately obvious with Arec is the change from dash to dodge really helped him. So the things that you can do to move around, right, is burst, dodge or dash, and drive. And you can always beat burst by having range, you can always beat drive by going faster. And, you might trade, but you're generally going to beat drive by going faster. And then dodge, you beat by entering the proper token. If it's start of beat for dodge and before after activating for dash.
Yeah.
So what happens when you change dash to dodge is that now, if you go fast and anti-start of beat, you cover all 3.
Yep.
Because
Exactly.
dash used to get you out of range at faster than you could go. But now we were running into issues like his finishers, for example. If you antied start of beat, auto hit because their drive speed are faster, and the opponent can't burst or dodge.
And his finishers are disgustingly good, too.
His finishers are really good. Those changes, they helped him out. And what's interesting is this wasn't always as true for other really, the banned characters, for example. Because if you go back in time to the tournament bans, those were Enderbit, because no one had the time to build an Enderbit for every tournament game. They were Sagas, because people were legitimately not sure of the rules implications of a lot of Sagas' stuff.
And also because Sagas is Sagas. Ugh.
Yeah, though I think it was more rules issues. The balance concerns about Sagas haven't come up in their current form until pretty recently.
Oh, for sure. I mean, but you're talking to the guy who thought Shadow meant an entirely different thing than what it actually meant, so...
Well, you'll never live that down, Marco.
I'll never live it down. I made an entire guide about it. Oh, God. Anyway.
And then Arec, because Arec was clearly the best character in the game. And Ottavia, because she's pretty clearly the second best character in the game, pre-nerf.
Yep.
Though, having more characters and more play experience, she might not actually have been quite there. And with the system changes, which did not help her.
To be fair, the system changes didn't help her, but also... Remember, we banned her in an era where we didn't have Fate or Trials or Wanderers yet.
That's true. Tesla didn't exist. She could counter dash really easily, and anti for Prio didn't exist either. Which gets you around a bunch of her weird gimmicks.
Yeah, exactly. And we have generally more faster characters coming in from Trials and Fate, right? So it all kind of evens out.
That's actually kind of interesting, because there aren't any real speedsters in Trials. And Fate, the only speedster is Welsi. And Welsi is kind of weird. The fastest characters in the game are still all from Devastation and War. Demetras, Arya, and Schecter. Okay,
that's fair, but how do I put this? It's not being the fastest, right? This is having more fast characters, and therefore having more even-ish matchups. As opposed to just fighting a bunch of, middling speed people with no stunt guard.
And actually, Rin from Wanderers is quite fast.
Yeah, she's pseudo-fast, right? Or is she actual fast?
She's actually fast. She's like +1, +1, +2, -1, plus some number between 3 and 5.
Yeah, okay, so she's actually fast.
Yeah. One of those ones might go to a 0, but she is fast.
I mean, she is fast. Yeah, so characters like that tend to make Ottavia, harder to play, because rather than just going I can just guess any number above the speed that I'm currently at, the higher your opponent's speed values are, the more numbers you have to guess from, which means the less likely you are to target lock, right?
So what happened with Ottavia, to sort of piggyback off that, was the biggest change we made to her is that she's now more precise, which means that a lot of her abilities that used to care if the opponent was slow now specifically care if the opponent is target locked, which pretty much wiped all that. But at the same time, we also upped the speed on her unique base by a little bit, which it's now 1-4-3-3 instead of 1-4-4-2. And it has basically what I usually nickname the critical hit effect, which is on damage, if the target is stunned, they lose extra life, which one or two other cards have, though they're fairly rare. It's basically a way of punishing the opponent for doing something unsafe, or being, in this, for Ottavia especially, being fast and getting stunned, right, because you got the target lock.
Yeah.
Or especially, she has a on hit, if their opponent's target locked, you stun them. So that obviously plays well together if you can guess right.
Yeah, sounds really cool.
Yeah, it worked out pretty well. I know Brad was very convinced that changing Ottavia styles alone would be enough to fix her, which is pretty much what happened. Remember what I said earlier about card shapes? Her shapes were pretty much okay. It was just a matter of how they interacted with heavyweights and how they interacted with the system mechanics at the time.
So one thing I seem to realize among all of our top tier characters, I'm going to mention the last one right now, or rather the top tier banned characters, including Kaitlyn, is that they seem to be the kinds of characters that are heavily polarizing in terms of their matchups. Where they essentially become checks, right? Like Arec is, how many shots do you have? Ottavia is, how much priority do you have? And for Kaitlyn, it's how many drives do you have, right? Is essentially what it all boils down to. Because these characters tend to, again, become unbalanced, not necessarily because their effects are so oppressive that the game falls down, though they were, but more of because like their gimmick is so overpoweringly good that certain characters can just do nothing against them.
Yeah.
And that tends to be what breaks characters.
So every character has a certain pool of movement effects, right? They have burst, they have drive, they have dodge. And when a character taxes power, for example, it's one thing. Like if I had a character whose whole gimmick was that they sucked, but they had soak 2 on every attack, right? Then heavy hitters wouldn't care as much, and light hitters would be very sad. But when you're taxing movement, it tends to have similar effects. You know, if you're very mobile, you don't care at all. And if you're not mobile, you're just really sad because
you're dead.
There's not much you can do. But because the mobile characters are the ones that hit really hard. Or sorry, the non-mobile characters. Well, the mobile characters, if they hit hard, then they take a risk somehow, and you can play that out. You know, you'll have some kind of interesting play there. But if the character relies really heavily on something that's not going to play evenly with the rest of the cast, like if my character has a lot of Stun Guard 4, that doesn't mean much. There's no character in the game that really always needs to stun every beat. And if you are a character who really wants to stun, then you're going to have some kind of non-stun defense to back it up. You'll be Demetros with his, prio and retreat mix-up. You'll be Schecter with access to ignore Stoke and Sun Guard on, limited cards. Other characters' tools, if they have that weakness, have some kind of shape to deal with it. But if your whole gimmick is based around taxing, like old Kaitlyn was weird because her entire kit was 2-4, 3-3, on hit, the opponent can't do anything, you have no stun guard.
Everything, yeah, pretty much.
And what that meant was that if your opponent's character shape can deal with that, you're just dead. Because there's no mix-up left. It's I'm going to play Bad Strike A, Bad Strike B, or Bad Strike C in the situations where the opponent, can't deal with it, and if the opponent is slow and hates that, you're going to play Thing That Ruins You 1, 2, or 3.
But if you're the kind of character who could deal with it, you could, and if you weren't, you just couldn't. And that was, again, not good gameplay, right?
Yeah, so that's what I was saying earlier, and that's really the biggest balance thing, and this is true of every game, regardless. It's true of BattleCON, it's true of Exceed. I assume it's true of Pixel Tactics, though I'm terrible at that game. It's true of most Euro games. And
wait, what are you talking about? As the lead balancer for Pixel Tactics, I can probably say whether or not it's true.
What it is that what's really key for overall gameplay design is card shapes. You're going to have cards that do types of things, and if the overall the shapes inside a kit don't work, then it's going to cause problems with the kit.
Oh, for sure.
And this is why, for example, Wizards of the Coast has a ton of R&D people that will playtest future designs specifically for, is this fun? Is this an interesting shape? And then they will take those designs and pass them afterwards onto developers and balancers and say, we're, reasonably close, make this balanced, clean it up, feed this into our card engine and make it good.
Quick fire before we end this podcast. Number 1, who do you think looks great? So we already talked about the characters that a lot of people are concerned about, right? These characters are heavily unbalanced. How are they going to be when we do the final patch? So we talked about all the banned characters, like Arec and Ottavia and Kaitlyn, right? How all of those got fixed.
Yeah, play new Kaitlyn. She's great.
Yeah, new Kaitlyn's great. She no longer becomes a check. She is now actually a proper control character. Thank God. But how about characters that you're still worried about? We don't need to go over the changes. Give me the character and give me why you're still worried about them.
So there's some new promos that are a little bit tricky, but I think the characters that are the most troubling are characters that have, again, those super strong gimmicks. So we're looking at Orianna a lot now because Orianna was kind of bad, but at the same time, Celestial might be the best card in the game. It's the one where you can't take any damage for the entire
Yeah.
beat, and damage instead turns into MP. And
Yeah,
it's got garbage
yeah.
stats like 0, -1, -4. So cards like that, where if the character is good, then dodge celestial hit just becomes not fun. It's something that we're looking at a lot. She's, I think, the only character in dev who we still are really working on. Other than that, we're looking at Hayden just to make her more fun, because probably making her spends optional is the biggest thing, because we tested like that for a while, and it works pretty well. We had to change it. We changed it for print because we were worried it was too strong, but I think it might end up being okay. And then, really, the set that has the most difficulty is War, because War, the characters are really gimmick-focused, for better or for worse. So there's a couple characters there. I don't know if we'll ever get like a truly balanced Sagas without gutting him and replacing him with a character that's called Sagas, but it's actually something else entirely.
To balance Sagas, you'd probably have to remove negation and echo, and at that point, like, what's the point?
Yeah,
right?
he's always going to be very matchup polarizing, because anyone who relies heavily on their styles, he just ruins. But at the same time, people were okay with tournament banning him for a long time. He may get tournament banned for having the Kaitlyn problem. There's just being a check on style-based characters. Otherwise, I mean, Demetros should probably be buffed. Tatsumi should probably be nerfed. The game, I think, at this point, with all the all of the testing and changes that we've done, is in pretty good shape.
I mean, Hepzibah probably just needs to get rid of Ignore Stun Guard token, right? And I think she'd be half okay.
Yeah, Hepzibah, the Ignore Stun Guard's the only really major issue with her. She still hits really hard, but she was never as broken as she seemed, because she does pay a bunch of life, but Pact Bond and Ignore Stun Guard, especially in combination, were pretty rough for a slower character.
The main reason she was broken is not because, like, she deals a lot of damage or whatever. The main reason she was broken was because she became a stat check. Are you a slow character? If you are, you're dead, right?
Right.
Like, that's essentially what it was. The moment you get rid of Ignore Stun Guard, suddenly it becomes actually a matchup. And Hepzibah actually has to deal with slower characters.
There were a bunch of stat checks in the game. I mean, heavies were not tournament great for a while, because a lot of the best characters in the game, like Clive, like Lysandra, like Hepzibah, like Tannis, can do really, really well against low characters, because part of their control involves either like huge positioning, push you really far, ignore stun guard, move both of us around a bunch, type effects that heavies just really don't like, because that inherent clumsiness, right? That ability that the opponent, if they want to go first, can go first and try and dodge you or try and sneak out of the way. It really is a significant drawback.
Yeah, it is. I mean, people say, oh, but they have stun guard, but it is such a huge drawback. I don't know. That's why most of our modern heavies, like, so the non-cadenza heavies, most modern heavies have a mix-up that stops people from just doing that whenever they want, right?
Right. So Amon, right, he has his soak high, soak low, if they're faster or slower. And just having one of those gimmicks, like Elagor's counter, or Amon's soak and the movement block, or Caesar's can't move past me, and then the start of beat push one, and that he has in BCO, as well as ignore stun guard, means that your attacks aren't all samey. There's things you can do. Like, if you're a heavy, hitting really hard at speed 4 versus hitting really hard at speed 2, you know, it's kind of whatever. If the opponent wants to go slow and hit back, they can. If the opponent wants to go fast, you probably have stun guard, so whatever. But if suddenly hitting really hard at speed 4 has ignore stun guard and hitting really hard at speed 2 doesn't, then they have to either outspeed and accept that they're going to trade down, or respect the mix-up and actually play BattleCON.
Like, almost all heavies after, or even during Devastation, all of them have a thing, right? All of them do a thing that makes them not just, I have range 1 to 3 and power 5 and stun guard 6, right? Like, it's not all of them have that shape. Cadenza is literally the only heavy who does that at this point.
Most heavy is sort of like subclass into control characters, because being heavy and preventing your opponent from doing stuff kind of go reasonably well together.
Which is a really interesting concept, but they are, essentially. Because you have to be, or else as a heavy you'll just cease functioning.
Yeah, because most non-heavies there are very, very few characters in the game that just want to punch you and trade stats indefinitely. It's not interesting. So if you're going to be punching a lot, then you probably have some kind of other mix-up. Whether you're like Magdalena and you want to punch a lot, but until then you have to run away. Or if you're like Pentros, so you punch a lot and while you're doing that, you still try and manipulate board position and do interesting stuff.
I mean, even the most punchy character in the entire game, Hikaru, still has you punch a lot until you have to reload, right? This is essentially what Hikaru is.
Yeah, and I mean, I would argue that Kaitlyn is actually punchier than Hikaru. But
that's fair, but even then, she has the gimmick of, I don't have to just realize how I punch this beat, but how I punch this beat influences how I punch next beat. Right?
And she also has no mobility. She has no during beat mobility. All of her setup is end of beat, or in like one case after activating, as well as stats being kind of clunky and telegraphed to the opponent. So when it comes down to that, even like the punchiest characters, who I think Hikaru and Kaitlyn are a fair assumption, they still have that feel of, I'm a tank. I'm generally slow, and if I'm fast, it's like bursty fast, right? I have one really fast style. But most of the time, if I want to get close to you, I'm the kind of character that might play a Soak 2 dodge and just move 3 towards you and accept that I'm taking some damage. And that's fine. That's fine. Like, they do that. They have the kit for that because they have some of the highest Soak in the game. Like, they can do Soak 3 cycles every other beat or Soak 2 every other beat. And it works well for them because they're not going to be hitting at the same amount of time that, a weaker character with better hit confirm and better mobility might.
Yeah, and that's why some of the most boring characters in the game are characters like pre-nerf or pre-change Lysandra, who literally are just, all my attacks are range 1 to 5 strikes. Like, sure, but it's not interesting, Lysandra, right? And that's the thing, like, if your character just homogenizes into the same attack over and over again, they're either really good or really bad, right? If the stats are good enough, they're really good, and if the stats aren't, they're just really bad.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the day. Yeah, I mean, at the same way, like, Joel was like that before, right? Because every Joel game was literally just dual wheel dash into a thing, dual wheel dash into Rune Blade, into Relentless Shot, into, like, some other third thing, or whatever.
Either, if you didn't dodge, then maybe Cutthroat Drive was pretty good, if you felt like taking the risk or were against a heavy. One of the biggest goals is you don't want to have characters cycling the same 3 things over and over again, because at that point, you're not playing the same game. It's not interesting. Sometimes it's okay for characters to have huge threats. Like, Clockwork Shot it's good. It's not broken, but it's good. And characters will have their version of Clockwork Shot, and it might be matchup specific. Like, if I'm a Marmalay, or if I'm Eligor, and I'm playing against somebody with Ignore Soak or Ignore Stun Guard, that's going to matter a lot. There's counterplay there, and that's what makes the game interesting. So the flip side of that is the game is really at its best when it's not just threat 50-50s. If I'm at range 4, for example, as Eligor, the odds of the opponent hitting me fast with that Ignore Stun Guard attack are probably not that high. I mean, if this is Destruction, or if this is Inevitable, right? If it's a 0 prio or maybe 1 prio, but no range Ignore Stun Guard, just by being far away, the opponent now probably can't hit me with that. And I can do something like Chain Drive, right? Or Vengeful Drive in order to get around the question entirely. And what makes the game so interesting is when you have the ability to set up in ways that sort of those questions now don't work properly.
I mean, that's essentially the game of BattleCON in its entirety, right? There are mix-ups and questions, and you do everything in your power to cancel them and make them no longer mix-ups. Like, that's the entire game, at least competitively speaking, right? Your entire line of play is not to win mix-ups, but to eliminate them entirely.
Right. In when you're playing against very good players, a lot of the time the biggest concern is not trying to win the current beat, which is always nice, but doing so in a way that also makes the next beat okay, and then the beat after that okay, or even better than okay. If I can trade evenly this beat but set up in such a way that your best question and your biggest threats, or even multiple of your biggest threats, don't work next beat, and now I'm favored going to next beat. That's a great. I mean, that's a one beat for sure.
That's the ideal. I mean, like, I literally put out a making connections video for BattleCon Online, where I literally dodge and choose to purposely get hit even while playing dodge. Because I know that if I did that, next beat, I would win 100% of the time, regardless of what my opponent played, right? But at the end of the day, I do think that that's what makes BattleCon interesting, because it has mix-ups, so there's always a chance that your opponent can come back, but you get to dictate how good those mix-ups are, which gives you a sense of agency and makes you feel like your decisions matter. So, Daniel, thank you so much for being on the show today. I really, really appreciate it.
No problem.
And I love hearing your insight, and I love hearing your thoughts on BattleCon balance. So everybody, thank you so much for listening to this episode of the New Level Cap podcast. I hope you like this episode about, updates on BattleCon Unleashed and updates on the BattleCon characters and the balancing. I know people are very interested in that. So if you want to tell us anything, you want to talk to me about the balance, you want to ask about the balance, please tell us in the comment section down below. As usual, it has been me, your host, Marco DeSantos, also known as Mechanic Critic, and with me has been a very special guest who has given us so much great information.
Daniel Honig, Underel.
Thank you so much for listening. If you love it, share it with a friend, and if you hate it, share it with an enemy. Don't forget your special action, and thank you, World of Indians. Thank you, and good night.
The New Level Cap podcast is produced by Level 99 Games. Join us next Wednesday for more design talk and shenanigans. Thank you for listening.